order to assess the economic impact of flying public and the city that would result from the addition of international air service to Hobby, we commissioned 2 studies by leading aviation economic experts, Intervistas Consulting LLC and GRA Incorporated, to evaluate the effects of such an operation on the city, its residents, and our airports. The methodology applied is well tested, highly valued, and utilized extensively by airlines and airports across the United States, as well as by the Federal Aviation Administration in preparing its ongoing reports of the economic impact of civil aviation on the U.S. economy. Following my remarks, I will call up Mr. Howard Mann and Mr. Goloszewski to say more about these models. Now, what do the models do? First, the models first forecast the likely air service to be initiated, the projected passenger increases at both Hobby and Bush Intercontinental. The second model then takes the output of the first model and uses that to forecast the number of jobs that would be created in the Houston region and the economic benefits for the residents and businesses of the community of the greater Houston region. Per the study, new international service at Hobby would create over 100,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs and generate approximately $1.6 billion in annual economic impact for the Houston area based on the network model's forecast of an additional 1.5 million passengers, the majority of which would visit Houston with less connecting passengers than connect today. Next slide.
Mr. Diaz, did you say 10,000 or 100,000?
10,000.
Yes, thank you.
So let's talk about some of the concerns. There are 3 principal concerns that we've heard. What about the contention that there was only one international airport in the Houston airport system? What about Customs and Border Protection staffing? Will we have enough? And what about the contention that the decision will harm United and Intercontinental Airport? Now, the claim has been made that there is a long-standing city policy, in effect, that Bush Intercontinental would be the only international airport in the Houston airport system. There is not a single document or any evidence supporting that contention. On the contrary, both of my immediate airport directors that I've spoken to, one of whom has served back as far as 1982, have said to me and maintained that no such policy ever existed to their knowledge. And both maintained that if such a policy had been discussed, they would have been opposed to it. Second, it is worth noting that dating back to at least 2002, that is a decade, in the public domain, the Houston Airport System's master plan for Hobby has anticipated international operations as a key component of Hobby's future plans, which include the development of international passenger forecasts, as I've said, from the year 2007 to 2022. Someone actually projected international passengers, and the construction of a federal inspection services facility and new international terminal on a layout in the airfield in those plans. Now, what about Customs and Border Protection staffing? Will we have enough? The issue of Customs and Border Protection staffing is the same issue as you have with the Transportation Security Administration staffing of security checkpoints. Many ask, what are we going to do? And the answer is, what we would need to do is what was done in Atlanta, as is done in numerous cities across the nation. In Atlanta, the city worked with the Customs and Border Protection and the Georgia Congressional Delegation to gain the additional agents to staff the new international terminal about to open next month. The city there received 120 new Customs and Border Protection agents. For the fiscal year 2012, Customs and Border Protection is adding 300 new agents to its budget. 75 of those agents are being split between Miami and Atlanta. Atlanta is receiving a total, as I've said, of 120 Customs and Border Protection agents when it opens its new international terminal next month. We need to remember, too, that these additional staffing would not be needed until 2015, and so we have time to do the needed and proper planning with Customs and Border Protection, assuming that the recommendation is to proceed forward. And we should note that the Department of Homeland Security is obligated to allocate Customs and Border Protection staffing where there is demand for its services, and it is reasonable to expect that the Houston Airport System and the City of Houston and the region will secure its fair share of regional resources, as this is where international traffic grows. Other airports, such as Atlanta and Miami, as I have mentioned, have recently expanded their federal facilities and have been able to secure higher Customs and Border Protection staffing levels, while others, such as Tampa, are just beginning that process. New technology and process improvements like global entry, one-stop, electronic system travel authorization in connection with the visa waiver program will likely reduce the need for incremental agents even as international passenger traffic grows across the country. Next slide. The next concern is one that I hear and is very important, and it is, what about the contention that the decision will harm Intercontinental Airport and United? Concerning the losses some say will occur at Intercontinental, we would say that if the economy of Houston was expected to stagnate or were forecast to contract, if we expected a reversal of population in-migration to out-migration, if we believe new business formation and relocation to Houston of businesses was going to cease, then we might be inclined to be concerned. But such is not the case. This is Houston, the fastest growing city region and most diverse in the United States, officially reaching a total of 6 million people last summer, surpassing Philadelphia to become the nation's fifth largest metropolitan area. From 2000 to 2009, Houston's population grew by 24.4% compared to the national average of 9.1%. This sustained economic growth results in demand for more air service, not less. That would mean more jobs, not less. For the same period, United carried the bulk of its passengers to Latin America, 2.3 million from the United States, 661 of those passengers local, 1.6 million transfer from other cities in the U.S. It is this same market segment, not European markets or other world markets, that United would compete with Southwest to accommodate. Imagine, too, if we simply, as I say, were to pick up the terminal at Hobby and move it to Intercontinental Airport. What would be different? The exact results would be seen. Whatever traffic would move to Southwest would move to Southwest. It would no longer flow to the United's network. Whatever happens to United is going to depend on United and whether it decides to compete or not. We know from numerous examples across the country that when legacy carriers encounter low-cost competition, including United, they do compete by lowering prices, increasing capacity and/or frequency, and improving the quality of services they provide. Some say that we shouldn't focus on competition between the airlines in Houston. We should instead look to have the airlines in Houston compete with those of the cities, namely of Atlanta, Dallas, Miami, even if that means overlooking, indeed accepting, dominant control by a single carrier of the fastest growing, most important market to Houston, Latin America. That said, we do not believe it is the city's role, nor is it in the community's best interest, to act as an arbitrator between two competing carriers over airport access and competition. Next slide. GRA Incorporated used the same methodology model, RIMS-2, used in the economic impact report for the Houston airport system of last year. This report, as I've mentioned before, was produced with economics professor Stephen Craig of the University of Houston. The model calculates the jobs created by expenditures made at airports and by companies doing business at the airport, direct expenditures, meaning leading to direct jobs. It calculates the jobs created by passengers spending money when they come to Houston on such things as transportation, lodging, food, shopping. These are indirect jobs. It then calculates the incremental jobs that would be created or jobs sustained in the region by the economic activity injected into the Houston economy. These are induced jobs. It does not attempt to calculate incremental economic benefits such as jobs created during construction or real estate purchases made by frequent visitors who may look to do so, new business formation by frequent visitors or even visitors to the Texas Medical Center, all made possible by lower airfares. Some people do not believe, next slide, some people do not believe economists when they talk about induced jobs as being real jobs. So take them out. Take out the induced jobs. If you simply take the direct and indirect jobs from the 2011 report for Hobby Airport, you see that the incremental direct and indirect jobs from the incremental forecasted passengers traffic represents similar increases. That is, if you take a look at the forecasted passenger increase of 1.5 million to the 9 million, it represents about 17%. If you take a look at the direct and indirect jobs that would be generated by this 1.5 million passengers, and you compare it to the indirect and direct jobs that were in the report of 2011, it's about the same, 17, 18%. So it seems to bear out. Next slide. If you look at pages 19 and 20 of the InterVista report, you will see a note in the chart presented on that page that for the month of March 2010, American Airlines had 3,400 departures out of Miami with 552,000 seats and low-cost competition from a single airline, Spirit. Then, when Interjet and Viva Aerobus entered the market in March of 2012, American Airlines further increased its departure and seats by about 4% over that very large base of departure and seats already being provided in the market. As important, if you look at page 20 of the report, you will note that as Spirit Airlines entered new markets where there was no low-cost competition, fares fell, while total revenues generated by all carriers actually rose. Cancun, fares fell by 6%, total revenues grew by 133%. Montego Bay, fares fell by 27%, revenues grew by 68%. San Jose, Costa Rica, fares fell by 31%, revenues grew by 16%. What this is saying is that when you get competition, and here's a very important point, some say, do I believe that Southwest can fly a passenger from Houston to Bogota, Colombia for $133? It's an interesting highlight, but it misses the point. The point is that when you have competition, the price points of both or all competitors is lower, in some cases substantially lower, than if a single carrier controls the supply and the pricing of the product. It's economics. And indeed, I would not be surprised if there were competition where on certain routes, United would actually have lower airfares than Southwest. The point is that unit prices, that is, the prices that are charged to the flying public, come down, but total passenger volumes rise and total revenues to the airlines rise. It's been shown time and time again across the country. Next slide. A similar situation can be seen in Chicago, where American Airlines had 164 departures with 24 seats from Midway, and United Airlines had 164 departures with just slightly higher seats. Move forward to March of 2012, and we note that whereas you now have two low-cost carriers operating from Midway, Volaris and Viva Aerobus, both American Airlines and United Airlines did what? They increased the departures and they increased the seats. In the case of American Airlines, to 111 departures and 32,220 seats, and for United Airlines, to 239 departures with 37,948 seats. They increased their departure and seats in the case of American by 29%, in the case of Southwest by about 46%. Next slide. As one travels across the country by air and sees the beautiful new terminals that have recently been opened and investment in new technology and innovative airfield improvements, we can't but ask the question, how did they finance all of this? How did they finance these beautiful terminals and other major improvements? The answer is they did it in part with passenger facility charges. San Francisco's new international terminal, Dallas-Fort Worth's new Terminal D, Atlanta's new international terminal, Miami's complete reconstruction of its entire terminal complex, the new international terminal in Philadelphia, Indianapolis's new domestic terminal, and Sacramento's new terminal that just opened in February were all financed in part with PFCs. Many of these airports began collecting the PFCs in advance of construction and so could use the collected PFCs with interest earnings to fund the cost of many early improvements, reducing interest expense associated with capital projects and requiring less bond financing to fund these projects. These funding methods actually help to keep the cost of the airlines in these cities lower than if traditional methods of financing had been used alone. Conservatively, if you look over the past 20 years, where the Houston airport system has simply not, has decided not to collect the PFC, Houston has foregone over $900 million in capital project funding by not having begun to collect the PFCs much, much earlier. It is now, I would say, at a distinct disadvantage relative to other airports, both in the quality of facilities available to the flying public and the cost of operations to the airlines. Next slide. Here's an example that you see on the slide. I'll just go through it very quickly. Again, I come back to you, my most recent experience at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, $6.2 billion invested in that airport. The citizens of the city of Atlanta have a brand new airport. New runways, new taxiways, new airfield improvements, end-around technology that allows aircraft to depart while aircraft are still crossing on the end. This was technology and innovation that was created in Atlanta. You have the new international terminal, $1.6 billion. A single terminal, 12 gates, $1.6 billion. $1.1 billion of that investment was funded with PFCs. And we ask, so what's the cost per enplanement in Atlanta? It's $4.41. What was it in 2000? When I first got there, it was $2.55. What will it be in 2013 when the international terminal opens? $4.41, all the way through 2017. Add the $4.50 to it, and what do you get? $8.91, rounded off to $9. The cost per enplanement is still cheaper than what we have here at Bush Intercontinental Airport, except that it's a brand new airport. And I don't know if some of you plan to or will fly through Atlanta, but it's a sterling, spectacular terminal, as is Dallas, as is San Francisco, as is so many of the international terminals that have taken place recently over the course of the PFC last 2 decades. Next slide. Here are some examples. These are all medium hubs. These are the same size airports as this hobby. Every one of them is collecting $4.50. For the large hub airports, of which Bush Intercontinental is one, Bush Intercontinental and I believe Charlotte are the only 2 large hub airports of the 39 that are not collecting $4.50. Next slide. One last point about the PFC that I think is very important in understanding it. I think the best analogy to use in explaining the PFC is the Hardy Toll Road. So when we use the Hardy Toll Road, no one thinks of the Hardy Toll Road, the $1.30 you pay for a segment, for the use of the segment of the Hardy Toll Road, as a head tax or a tax. It's a user fee. It's for the use of the Hardy Toll Road. And no one stops and says, well, wait a minute, I only use a piece of the Hardy Toll Road. So if I'm going to pay $1.30 for the piece of the Hardy Toll Road, it should only go to the piece of Hardy Toll Road. I'm reminded of a story that I read by Gordon Bethune in his book From Worst to First, where he, at the time, Continental was just horrible, couldn't get out of the box, and they were always last in terms of on-time performance. And he and Greg Brenneman came up with this idea that every month that Continental was #1, every employee in the Continental system would receive a check for $100. And then one day, during a session with employees, a pilot raised his hand and said, wait a minute, Gordon, I'm a pilot. Why am I receiving the same $100 that everyone else is? And Gordon's reaction to him was, see this watch? What is it about this watch you don't think we need? What is it about the Hardy Toll Road system that we don't think we need? What is it about airports and its components that we don't think we need? The runways, the taxiways, the terminals, the roadways? PFCs are used to fund all of those improvements. and to ask a passenger to fund an international terminal or to fund a runway or to fund a domestic terminal. It's the system, and it goes to the benefit of the public in the region. And so it's just another way to think about PFCs. Quickly, on the slide before you, you can see that if you think about the additional incremental activity in terms of flights at Hobby, it amounts to, forecasted when we're at the 20 additional flights, 14.3% of incremental departure seats. But if you take a look at the actual operations at Hobby, which are about 250,000 a year, 20 is actually less than 10%. Next slide. And clearly, I think the mayor has said this more eloquently than I can ever, there's a lot of work to do. There are clearly many, many more discussions to be held. There are briefings of many, many interested parties, stakeholders, that must take place before all the pool of meaning is filled and people can drink from that pool and reach a rational and well-conceived decision. And with that, I think that's the last slide. I would just like to pause for a few minutes, and I would like to first ask Mr. Mann of InterVistas to come up and speak to you. Thank you very much.